Okay, hey, Cynthia. So how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm well. And where are you exactly?
At the moment, I'm in Boston playing with the Boston Early Music Festival. We just did a chamber opera in Jordan Hall, and we're going to Miami tomorrow to repeat it there and some other cities.
Oh
So,
wow. Which
so
which opera did you do?
one that absolutely no one has ever heard of, The Dragon of Wantley with by Lampe, Lampe, and German English, a composer around the time of Handel, written in 1740. It's a parody of all opera. It's really funny.
It,
And
it's a
so
it's a what?
it's a parody of just normal opera singing. So the whole thing is just hilarious, but the music is good. And I'm having a lot of fun.
And it's a parody written by someone named Lump.
Lampe, Lampe. But you will have, nobody's ever heard of it.
All right. Wow. And you've got a performance in Boston and then in Florida, did you say?
Yes, we just the last 2 days, on the weekend we had performances, and then we go to Miami, and then we go to Troy.
To Troy, New York.
Yes, because you know that Savings Bank, that incredible hall where everybody does recordings, they have a series there, so we're
Uh,
playing it there.
it seems a little, I guess, to go Boston down south and then up again.
Yep.
It's
The
not the most
nature of
efficient.
tours. I've been um I've been on a tour to Spain, or all those tours that we do. You start on one end, then you go fly all the way across the country, do a concert, then come back. They just get the dates when they can get the dates.
Yeah, sure, sure. Well, we play when we can play.
Yes.
So speaking of which, so we have this Baroque concert. Oh dear, the doorbell. I'm going to ignore the doorbell. Hope they go away. Baroque concert on December 17th,
Yes.
Sunday, 3 o'clock at St. Paul's. And you're doing I think a Castello sonata and also a solo Bieber sonata, right?
Yes. Yes. The Beaver Passacaglia, which is my favorite beaver of all times.
Well, can you tell us a little about Bieber? I mean, I've heard of Bieber. I think of him as a kind of precursor to Bach in some ways.
It,
But some of the audience might not have heard of what is Heinz Ignaz Bieber or something like that.
exactly. Yeah. Well, he wrote two sets of sonatas that he was really famous for around 1675, 76, and 81, 1681. The first set, he was a fantastic violinist of his
So
time.
that
And
wait, 1681 was 4 years before Bach was born, right?
yes,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
totally different generation,
Yeah.
Austrian, Austrian violinist. And he wrote a set of sonatas, mystery sonatas, um, where the first sonata and the last sonata are tuned to normal violin tunings, E, A, D, G, but the rest of them are scordatura. So he tunes the strings in different keys. It may be just like A, D. And then the music you're looking at, it's almost like Suzuki, play by play by finger. You just
Are you
play what
writing in all the fingerings, or I guess you've got it memorized at this point?
you're getting used to it. Yeah. The one I'm doing is actually in the regular tuning scheme, but it's the final one of all his sonatas, and it's the most sublime. But he innovated, he did this and really, really expanded the violin technique. And it's, in a way, it's some tricks as well. I mean, you can play octaves. We're getting technical here. I mean, you can go block fifths all the way up, and it's going to sound like octaves. One of the sonatas, he
Oh.
crosses the A and the D string at the bridge. So you're playing the top string, then the next one over you think is the second string down, and it's instead the third string. It's really fun. Um,
Why are these called the mystery sonatas?
they're for the rosary. They're either called mystery sonatas or rosary sonatas, and they were composed for Catholic church services. And so each one, the first one is the Annunciation, when Angel Gabriel comes down. I mean, I had to learn it through the piece to tell Mary that she was going to have an important baby, and it goes through the whole life. And so the crucifixion is one of them. But what's really good for violinists to know, or string players, is that he developed so many bow techniques, some of which don't even exist now, but some of them, went on to become Locatelli and Paganini. I mean, he had all this special virtuosic writing that's fantastic to play. And of course, we play it with the short bow, the 17th century bow. Sometimes they call it a Bieber bow. And so that's also wonderful. So there's lots and lots of fast, little tiny notes that if you try it on your regular violin with just a regular modern Tourt bow, it's just too heavy, and you think, oh, I better slur all these notes. I mean, I looked at it when I was in school, never having heard of the Baroque violin or bow, and it doesn't really work. So that's probably why you don't see it too often played in the regular mainstream. But on a Baroque violin, fantastic.
Well, what was happening in terms of the history of the violin in the 16th century? How new was the violin at that point, and where did the violin come from? I actually don't know. Was it originally, I'm guessing, something like maybe an Arabic instrument, or what's the origin of the violin? I think of the guitar and.
Yeah, well, it came into prominence, in the Renaissance, when they were, violin-shaped objects, but then it just accompanied vocal music, and so it was madrigals, and it developed that way. And then the violin is per se a little bit before 1600 was starting to really flourish. My violin that I'm using for this concert is a Maggini, and it was made in 1620, and it's an original. It's a really special violin, and any of you coming to the concert, make sure to come up and say hi afterwards, and I'll show you this violin, because on the back it's all inlaid with really special markings, but inlaid with wood, not just painted on. And it's a fantastic instrument.
And you're only playing, you're gonna have to, are you bringing more than one violin, because you'll be doing different tunes?
It's perfect. No, I'm just, the piece I chose, the Passacaglia, is in the regular tuning, but I'm just telling you the history. What Bieber was famous for is this innovation of the scordatura tuning. But I put those on concerts often, but then you're right, you have to bring different violin. I've played about half of them in one concert, and I used 3 violins, and you finish one, and as you put that down, you tune it up to the next pitch that's going to be 3 pieces later, let it sit there, go out and take the next one. So Bieber is special for violinists.
Well, it's so interesting how these, I know with my viola, which is, modern setup, but the instruments really are, they're kind of alive in a sense, right? The strings, and all the more so period instrument, where you've got gut strings, and my instrument changes hugely on the humidity.
Yes.
And all the more so if you've got gut strings, you're having to adjust all the time. It's constantly reacting to the environment. It's not, I'm kind of guessing, an electric guitar would not change so much, but I don't know, maybe.
Exactly. No, and even modern strings, on our modern instruments on your viola, they're not going to change as much, but the gut strings are very susceptible to anything, humidity, lights in a concert hall, one little draft coming from the back, but they're worth it. Playing on gut strings with this kind of music is fantastic. You can get all kinds of articulations, and sounds without using excessive vibrato. You do everything with the gut strings, with the bow, and just bring out all these subtle shapes. I love playing on gut. Heifetz played on gut, you know, for a long time, and all those violinists, Misha Elman, they until they invented the stable, louder strings, which, you know, made a lot of sense. But for this music, it's much better on gut. And for Bieber with a little tiny bow, I'll show it to you when we meet on the 17th.
And the gut, it's not catgut, but it's actually sheep. It's a sheep intestine, right? Is that
yes?
Correct?
Yes, but it's from what I understand, no sheep was killed to extract violin and cello strings. I think they take it as a byproduct. So don't worry your audience.
Okay. Are there problems with vegetarian or vegan period players ever? I'm just curious.
I had one. You know, I have a vast amount of students at Juilliard Eastman and North Texas and everywhere else. And so I did have one that was opposed to using the gut. And so I just let her to use these plastic things. They make them, but they sound horrible. And I just let her go through that, and somehow she switched back.
Sure. Well,
yeah.
Look the other way from time to time.
Yeah.
So I have a vegetarian friend who makes an exception for bacon.
Well,
so I'm just like, okay,
yeah,
sure.
Yep.
But all right. So you mentioned in school that you didn't know anything about period playing. So what has been your journey from a modern player to someone who specializes in historical performance? I think I could say yes. And
Yeah.
you're the main violin teacher in historical performance at Juilliard, for instance. So yeah, how did you wind up here?
Well, I was always a modern player, you know, played my 20 concertos with orchestras and things like that, and studied with Joseph Silverstein here at New England Conservatory. He's a fantastic teacher in Boston. And in a subtle way, he started sending me in that direction, because even though he played on his Guadagnini and Guarneri in, you know, regular modern style, with the vibrato and the sound and chin rest, shoulder rest, all of that, he, for all his tempos in Bach, he actually had done lots and lots of reading of treatises and period playing, and he was just trying to get that to happen on the regular instrument. So I sort of, you know, from age 18 started going in that direction. But he did ask me to go to a couple of concerts during the time I studied with him, you know, really famous European Baroque instrumentalists like Honor Bilsma and the Kaukin brothers. And you know, and of course you do everything Mr. Silverstein asked. He also said to come to Zuckerman concert to watch his poem. So I would do everything he asked, but somehow I was busy practicing my Paganini caprices for his lesson the next day. I missed all the Baroque concerts, went to Zuckerman. So I didn't really get involved with it then. And then I studied with Joseph Gingold for 5 years at Indiana, and he was incredible, and he's definitely not a Baroque violinist. But upstairs, Stanley Ritchie, famous teacher who taught many, many Baroque players. I met him and played for him once, and he just said, "Oh, you must try this Baroque violin." And from the first lesson, I was sold as an addition. I was always a regular modern major, you know, doing all my hours a day of Vieuxtemps, Brahms, and Paganini. But then somehow there were a few more hours, and then I just started. I didn't switch over, and I'm a kind of person where I don't say one is better than the other. You know, it's like in this day and time, we should be able to do all of it. And that's where I have a lot of success with some of my best students, because this new generation, they can do all of it. They might specialize for a couple of years on our Juilliard program or something else on the Baroque, but then they go out there and they could just pick up this instrument for that and that one for this, and they can play their Bach on both instruments.
I mean, I've noticed correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be a pattern amongst a certain type of player who specializes in two things which would seem to be contradictory, which is I have friends who are violinists who are period players, but they also have a particular interest in contemporary music.
I knew you were going to say that, because this is an interview. I didn't interrupt you, but exactly. And I was one, I did lots of new music as well. I think it's that kind of interest. It's like, we like to know, how will you ever know? But we'd like to try to get as close as possible to find out, what does the composer want? What's possible? And you can, with these days, you can talk to the living composers and have a fantastic time with that. And then now there's much more and more research, reading all the treatises to try to find out what did happen then, how they phrased, how they held the instrument, what kind of bow, what was the technique, there's everything coming out. And now on the internet, you can read it all. And when I was studying, I went over to The Hague, Amsterdam for a year, and we'd go to a special library, and wait 2 hours to get one thing, and look it up, or go to our teacher's house and then take a pile of Xerox music and treatises and then copy them. And now it's just so easy to get information. So more and more people are really much better informed, and then they can choose to do it or not. But it's always good to see. My other violin is a Jakob Steiner, and Bieber owned 2 Steiners, and Bach had a Steiner. And then we have replicas of the bows, as close as we can think of what they were. There's a lot of difference in different countries, and they were experimenting, but it's really interesting. Just take the Steiner instrument that Bach had. It was his greatest possession, more than his house, more than anything else. It was on his death certificate or something. So just take that instrument and try to see how some of the Bach bowings might have sounded, and you can see what it can do and what it can't do.
And you played on Bach's violin then?
Of the same maker.
The same maker.
Yeah, the same maker. But Steiner, Jakob Steiner, he didn't make that many violins, but he was really famous until Stradivarius. At the beginning of Stradivarius's time, he was more famous than Stradivarius. So
that's interesting though. So I'm imagining, let's say you've got what you're saying is a period instrument, a violin setup, a period with a Baroque bow, a period bow, is going to behave very differently from a modern setup. But what do you do when you have for instance, a student who comes in with a modern violin and a modern bow, and they can't afford, or maybe they don't have time to have another instrument, but their heart is in the period playing. I'm thinking, I heard a few years ago, I heard the Philadelphia Orchestra do they did the Four Seasons, and it was, honestly, it was kind of painful, because I have the period sound in my ear, and you're hearing this, large, it's a great orchestra, but a, large, heavy, unwieldy instrument playing this music, which should be very fleet. But if a student came in and wanted to play, a Bach sonata on a modern setup, you know, there are compromises that have to be made, for instance, but how do you negotiate that?
I actually work with a lot of modern violinists on that very thing. It's people that may never play a baroque violin in their life, or they try it for a semester or two, or they try it just for an hour. I give them my violin and we show them things. I mean, we're living in the modern world with huge concert halls, and most people are playing their Bach on the instruments of today with a tort bow. So
Right. So
that's a good thing.
more muscular version.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, everything just was because of the later music, the instruments got louder and louder and developed, and the bows different. And so there's nothing wrong with it at all. I mean, it's like I love hearing Bach that way, but I don't love hearing it with the old-fashioned bowings of the 50s and 60s now. You know, like lots of heavy hook bowings, and like the violin sonatas and partitas, all the dance movements should resemble the dance movements that we know. So you can get a lot from just even an afternoon or a week of just playing on the gut string, seeing what the bow, it's mostly the bow on the gut, but the bow, it can show you what Bach had access to at the time when he was writing these. And sometimes, you know, there's all these slurs that for years, you know, on my other violin, we just break up the slurs randomly just to keep the full sound going. And it's really interesting if you read about tempos at the time, and then you try some of the tempos and look at the harmonies and read Bach from the bass up, from the bass line and the shape of the bass line. A lot of things work. You know, a lot of the slow movements work at a much more moving tempo and more freedom. And then the Bach's bowings, he played the violin, you know, he wouldn't just randomly put in something that was too long. They can actually work. So I'm meeting a lot of people that are actually using their modern instrument, and, you know, a little more vibrato, but not a Tchaikovsky vibrato, but just a color. But and they're playing on modern strings or their modern bow, but they're getting the shapes and they're exploring the dance and the tempo, and it's great. It's very exciting. I did a lot of teaching at Curtis for the last 5 years, so I got phenomenal players, and so I took my instrument there and showed it to them, and I have some fantastic secondary students at Juilliard, unbelievable ones that are going into all the big competitions and have won some competitions. And that this new generation of people, they're the ones asking me. I don't inflict it on them. They say, I want to hear about this. I want to learn about this. Can I see what this is like? And it doesn't mean they're going to change careers and only be a baroque violinist, but they'll they're just getting more ideas.
And how does since I don't think the metronome wasn't invented, right, until maybe the 18th century, I'm guessing. So when you're reading treatises about tempo, how did they indicate or suggest what a tempo, I mean, how do you know that a slow movement would be a little faster, for instance?
Well, one thing we can study is the dance treatises and the steps. That's a big resource for us. So a gavotte, I mean, dancers, there's only certain physical, they can only go at certain tempos, and they write about it all the time. And then they just, you know, they describe adagio, adagio, at ease. So it's, I mean, an adagio in the Baroque period is completely different from Brahms' adagio or Shostakovich. You know, I mean, it doesn't mean the same tempo. And they write a lot about tempo. I'm So it's possible to look this up. And then you use the bow and you see what can work with the bow following the articulations.
Sure. Yeah, I guess just physically, when you've got the gut strings and you've got a bow which is shorter than a modern bow, and just the whole setup of the instrument, it will lend itself to a certain kind of sound, just
Right.
like just like a bicycle or a certain car wants to go to a certain speed, and you'll fall over on the bike if it's too slow. For instance.
Exactly, that's a good analogy. And also remember that they weren't playing their Bach sonata in Avery Fisher Hall and Carnegie Hall. I mean, they were playing in rooms, drawing rooms, or smaller theaters, or in a church. So it was a much smaller situation.
Musica da camera, music,
Yeah.
chamber music.
Yeah. Yeah. So
well, if I wanted to put a link in to one YouTube recording of a baroque violinist, is there any particular recording and a piece that you would suggest?
Okay, right off the top of my head, I would say Rachel Podger. Many people know her. She's from England, from London, and she's won Gramophone Artist of the Year a couple of years ago, and she's recording everything possible. And she comes as a guest to teach my violinists at Juilliard a couple times a year, and she's a lovely, lovely person. And you could look up the Bieber Rosary Mystery Sonatas.
Sure.
With her. She would be fantastic. There are many people out there, but that's I would start there.
Yeah, I actually saw her in Budapest many years ago.
Oh,
yeah, it was amazing in the Liszt Academy. So.
Yep, she's amazing. She's so relaxed and she's so free, and the music that comes out of her violin feels like it's improvised at all times. So we all learn a lot from her.
Sure. Well, do you listen to any non-classical music at all?
Oh, yes. If you do it 8 hours a day, classical music, you have to not listen to it some of the time. So I've always loved jazz, and I was even back in high school, I had friends that trained me, best friend saxophone player that got me to know everything of Charlie Parker. I had it memorized. And I love jazz trumpet, Miles Davis, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald for the voice. Yeah, and of course, Stefan Grappelli and Jean-Luc Ponty, and I have many of them. Like
what was the one recording that pops into your mind?
Stefan Grappelli. I'd have to look up what it was, but there's some incredible, since I'm speaking as a violinist, I would just recommend to listen to him. Yeah. I met him at the Blue Note while he was still alive, and I talked to him. He was so charming, and he knew my teacher, Mr. Gingold, and so we talked, and it was just a really special moment.
How did he know Gingold?
They were friends. They were, Gingold knew all the top violinists, and in Paris, he was one of them. It doesn't matter if it was, regular concerto violinist, or they were good friends.
Sure. Wow. I should say I studied with Gingold I coached with him at Meadowmount.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you love amazing.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
You just walked into the room and everyone just played. You just played better.
Just by being near him. Yeah. And I had 5 years of that. It was incredible.
Yeah, incredible integrity as a musician.
Yes.
And a person too was my impression. I mean, I was a kid. I was 16 or 17, but
wow. He almost played for my wedding. He tried really, really hard. I was married up in Duxbury, Massachusetts, and he tried for a few months to work out the time to come.
Wow.
So that would have been nice, but still the thought of it is nice.
Sure. That's incredible. So, all right, one last question for you. So, when you're on the road, we as musicians, we're always looking for interesting things to eat or favorite things.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have a favorite food that you're looking for when you're traveling, or at home, maybe a go-to?
Yeah, okay. Food and wine, that's a very good subject. Because you're right, when you're on tour, that's one of the high points. Well, when I'm on exotic tours, like India, was in India for 10 days, or well, New Zealand is not known for its food, but it's a beautiful place. But I mean,
Lamb.
China, I've been there 5 times for extended period. China, Japan 3 times for about a month each.
Wow.
Yeah, so Japan, what I try to do when I went to Japan for a month the first time, I was like, I'm famous for I'm not going to have a mouthful of Western food. We're in these fancy hotels and my colleagues are putting Cheerios and milk, you
Oh,
know. So
yeah.
I'm having the fish and then the natto and all the soybeans and the umeboshi plums and the yeah. So I love just sort of immersing myself in the culture in all ways. Look at the architecture, talk to all the people, but then also eat their food. I love food. And then if you go to France, there's no question about that, or Italy, but also all these other exotic places. So I can get really interested in lots of cuisines, but let's see. Right at the moment, duck is a specialty.
Sure. Well, tis the
all
season also.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking of. All kinds of cheeses and the wine pairings that go with them. I like to study all that. So yes, one of the big benefits of being on tour is exploring the cuisines.
And wait, so do you like natto?
Yep, I have it. I'm weird that way. I like it. It's in my New York apartment right now. I buy it. I go to these Japanese stores. I mean, it's fermented soybeans, supposed to be really good for you. I can. Yep.
I mean, it's got the consistency of okra, this kind of slimy.
Yep. I like okra too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have a hypothesis about cultures. Like in my experience, the cultures with the best food tend to have, in my opinion, the worst breakfasts. But the cultures with the worst food often have great breakfasts. So you think of Scandinavia or England, Scandinavia smorgasbord, or
yep,
England, the
yeah,
farmer's breakfast with the eggs and the beans and
beans,
tomatoes and black pudding and sausage and bacon.
exactly.
But I mean, in Japan, or well, like France and Italy, coffee and
Piece of bread.
and
Yeah.
a piece of bread or croissant.
Croissant. Yeah, that's a really good point.
In Japan, I remember these breakfasts that, in a little ryokan in the middle of, little inn in the middle of nowhere, this beautiful breakfast, but it was, this fish with
Yep. I
10
love the
kinds of pickles, and you'd have a bowl of rice that you could crack a raw egg over it, which I'm sure some would say that's a wonderful breakfast, but to me it was kind of appalling.
Yep. But I do it. I've gone there and that's what I do. I just want to know what it feels like. And I do love, I'd rather have the fish than I feel much better if I have fish and then I'm going to go play the violin 6 hours that day. Or if I have, 2 fancy croissants that taste incredible, but like an hour later, I'm exhausted. And so I like to keep discovering all that. But you made a really good point about the breakfasts and the, Italian dinners, French dinners. They're right up there.
Well, I think I'm getting hungry now, actually. So, Cynthia, it's great to see you. It's great to talk with you, and can't Can't wait for the concert in in just a few weeks at this point.
Yes. A funny thing happened last night. I left Jordan Hall after our concert, and a block away is Symphony Hall, and Perry Sutton, the trumpet player, was standing outside just waiting for a taxi, and nobody else was around. We ran into each other and said, I can't wait to play with you in a couple weeks. So it's a small world.
Yeah, the Baroque community seems particularly small. I mean, this concert, it's our life as chamber musicians. You'll